They asked me would I be willing to read some of the more challenging parts, and so I've selected some that I'll read through. It is possible that I might get emotional. I do have tissue nearby. And then there is one section, I'll tell you where it is when I'm reading it, but there's one section where I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. So if you're trying to follow along, it may not make sense to you. So that's why. But I want to start with something that's in the opening that may be missed, and it's actually a very important piece of my life. And so I want to start with this. A constant state of prayer. That is how I live. Prayer, in my view, is consistent communion and conversation with God. There isn't a process, an order, or a set of rules for me regarding prayer. For me, it's quieting my mind enough to feel into my body and then my soul. It's slowing myself enough to feel fully connected to my being in separation from the world around me and all that may be going on in life. It's then opening myself in stillness to hear. I've pleaded and expressed frustrations. I've brought in a sense of connectedness and peace. I've patiently and impatiently waited for wisdom, for what feels like truth from all that is divine. This, for me, is a constant state of prayer, and it's the most important piece of my human existence puzzle. I don't know if this didn't exist for me, if I could have navigated, walked through some of these things that I have walked through in life and with my son, if I didn't have not only a rock solid belief in divinity, but that divinity was on my side. And I think sometimes in our lives, everybody has got a deep and wide story and pieces of their story they don't necessarily share. And to know that divinity is on your side, to claim that, sometimes it's the faith that we need to keep going, and it's been that for me many times. All right, I'm going to start in chapter 2. And this is a big opening event in my life. November 24th, 1980 brought a pain I could never have imagined. It was my first real earthquake life experience. A day so vividly etched in my soul, just thinking about it brings back the real, as if I'm watching the movie on the biggest screen in existence. It wasn't my parents' divorce, which happened when I was a sophomore in high school. It wasn't the challenge that came with attending 3 high schools and moving between one parent's home and another. It wasn't even my father's alcoholism and resulting behaviors. These things all impacted my life significantly, but they in no way compared to what I experienced and what resulted from the events of that day. It was a sunny day and I was in a particularly high-spirited mood. Things were starting to click for me in this 3rd high school, and I started to feel connected to a few friend circles that brought me a feeling of belonging. There was something special about this school, and while I didn't know it then, many members of this amazing class of people, the Washington Rams of 1981, would become a lifelong tribe of mine. On that day, I had taken the bus to work after school. I worked at a clothing store called Piccadilly, and that name still cracks me up. It was at the Christown Mall. When I arrived, my boss said that my mom had called and I needed to call her back. I didn't really notice at the time, but looking back, she had a look of concern on her face that I didn't pick up on. I figured that my mom just wanted to know what time I was getting off, because she would be the one to pick me up after work, given that I was living with her at the time. Oddly, I didn't pay attention to the ominous sound in my boss Bethany's voice when she asked me again, "Did you call your mom?" I was walking toward the front of the store, planning to go to Peter Piper Pizza, a few doors down, for my favorite salad, the one with a delicious, creamy, just the right amount of drizzled on blue cheese dressing when I saw her. My dad had remarried, and the way my stepmom was approaching the store told me everything I needed to know. I instinctively began to back up while she continued approaching, knowing that I didn't want to hear whatever it was she had to say. That's a period, actually. I looked behind me, and my bosses, as well as the district manager, were approaching me, tears falling from their eyes, my bags held in their hands. I wondered, why are they carrying my things? I turned back toward my stepmom to hear the words that would pierce my soul and change me forever. Get your stuff. Get your stuff, Deb. Your sister is dead. That's how I learned that my person, the one and only person that I trusted, was gone from my life forever. I was 17 years old. And the beginning of the trial that came from that, it was rocky. But as time went on, I began to see how that could affect me, how that did affect me in a positive way, as odd as that sounds, that I could take from it some value to impact my life. And one of the ways that I did that was to begin to look at life in terms of, am I really living in the moments that I have? And that Julie's 19 years on this planet, the thought of her in my life has visited me so many times, almost as if divinity itself is saying, hey, do you remember to live? And it's easy to get caught up in the noise of the world and forget that we have this opportunity to live in every moment, even at different levels. So fast forward, in life, there's just a ton of stuff that happened in my life. And I had an amazing, beautiful son in 1992. His name is Andrew. And we have had a relatively normal family life. Andrew came from a broken home. I've been married twice. I talk about that in the book. But I only talk about that to a certain degree. And I want to explain why. I believe that we're given experiences, that they are part of our refinement. And I could spend time listing for everybody in the world all the wrongs. But I number one value for me is honor. This doesn't feel honoring. And it doesn't fall in line with my philosophy about life itself. So what's there is just enough for you to understand. So toward the end of my marriage and just after 2011, which was by far the most packed with difficult experiences year of my life, I began to really rethink about a lot of things. What I'm going to read to you happened before, just at the end, the tail end of this 2011 year, and it's in chapter 12. I start down about mid-page. If you're willing to be aware enough, there comes a point in time where you can see the part you're playing or have played in every situation and interaction, good or bad, or somewhere in between. You serve yourself and others best when you can come from whole honesty with yourself first, and doing that sometimes come with having to acknowledge and own some uncomfortable truths. I gave this kid a beautiful space to sit and get high. Now, what you may not know, or you may know by looking at the cover, is that my son walked into a heroin addiction. And the road and the journey as it relates to that was unbearably, but I bared it, right? Unbearably rough. And he, on the date that I released this book, was his 5th sobriety birthday. So that you know, he's sober and doing well. At first, of course, I didn't realize that I was doing that. And once I did realize that I was too busy trying to convince myself it wasn't happening to do things differently, then I realized exactly what I was doing and was terrified of the potential outcome. It was some serious life and death shit we were dealing with. I was afraid to take action, and yet I knew that if I were to take action, I needed to be confident in which action would bring about the best possible outcome. It was time for me to start making some tougher choices. I'm going to speed up to page 106. At some point prior to December of 2011, when we were really in the thick of things, Andrew had been missing and wouldn't answer his phone. Desperate to find him, I drove around and around. While I was headed down 67th Avenue in Glendale, while talking with Andrew on the phone, I admitted, I hope I don't make it home. He claims this to be one of the two lowest moments of his life. I'll talk about the other one later. I kept thinking about how easily I could just drive my car into something and end the insanity. I couldn't figure out how to help him. My own life was on the tail end of imploding. I felt such an enormous sense of confused shame. I was, for the most part, proud of how I'd raised this boy. Making sense of how he went from such a great kid to this horrendous point was so confusing in an almost crippling way. The amazing person I knew was still in there. I could see him, but he was slipping away, and a whole different person was emerging. I wondered, how did we even get here? While feeling painfully aware that there was no one with whom I could sort out my feelings. I mean, who can even receive this kind of information? We're talking about a darkness that's so hard to describe, one that most people simply can't get comfortable with. There wasn't a, oh, let me open up my enormous crevasse of woundedness and share it with you option. Maybe a more honest version of that statement is, the shame and pain just didn't feel like something you have coffee over. And maybe in the end, the fact that I felt I didn't have anyone to chat it over with was a blessing all its own, because years ago, I needed the input of others in order to make a decision. I was frozen by multiple people's truth. I shortened that sentence just so you know. This is a characteristic of being an adult child of an alcoholic. So my father was a lifelong alcoholic, and he died in 2011. And I didn't realize it was a characteristic until much later in my life. It wasn't until I stopped listening to and consulting others on a decision I have to make that I began to connect to my own truth and trust my own personal rudder. We do that. You know, when we're in a place of indecision, we tend to consult. And this is not always best. We know. We've been given this powerful gift of intuition so that we can connect in, so that God and all that is divine can connect with us, and we can become clear. We have this within ourselves. It's not just some random gift that has been dispersed to the special few. Every single one of you have this as well. And it just requires the quieting and the listening and the honing in with yourself. As I drove home, my thoughts pondered questions such as, how do I hold love for the addicts in my life and still own or even just stay on my own path? How do I still create my own story, love them, and yet not step into the life that they were creating, for which I had, if I may state it again, exactly zero interest? Was I required to, by their choices, alter my direction? Should I feel guilty, bad, even shameful for their choices? What did it say about me that they were making these choices? What does it say about me that I think this way? At this point, on this day, driving down 67th Avenue, it wasn't a matter of whether or not, it wasn't a matter of wondering whether I could continue to do it on my own. It was a matter of thinking I couldn't do it anymore, period. It wasn't a matter of taking the easy way out. I wasn't trying to end my life. I was trying to end my pain. And this seemed to be the only way to do it. Nothing was working. It was destroying me inside. There was a feeling of my heart and throat being clenched with an overwhelming fear, and there was no clear solution in sight. The pain lived within me, and there seemed to be only one way to get relief from it. I would swear that it was raining that night, that maybe that was just in my soul. After hanging up the phone, Andrew immediately felt broken and was so incredibly worried about me. So of course my thoughts then turned to, what did I just say? How could I have said that to my own kid? It was yet another one of those not my proudest moments. And it was also a turning point for me in terms of knowing that it was time for me to get my shit together. I could barely breathe. I don't remember where I was going or what I was doing, but I headed home and he was there. And we embraced, crying, while silently knowing that neither of us had the answers. I asked Andrew about his perspective on this experience because I know as a gigantic maelstrom was churning inside my body, one was churning in his as well. And it was important to me to listen and to really hear his experience. What oftentimes is more important than talking merely about the errors and extraordinarily poor choices someone makes is the emotional aspect of going through something and trying to wrestle one's way out of it, what it feels like to everyone involved. And this is what he said. This will be hard for me. This one hurts. I had a bunch of missed calls and texts from my mom. I was off getting loaded somewhere, and she was out looking for my body. I was in a garage at a friend's house, and I don't remember if I called her or finally answered her call, but she said, I hope I don't make it home. I fell to the ground and bawled my eyes out. At that moment, there weren't enough drugs on the earth to get rid of that pain. Throughout my whole life, I've struggled with an acute paranoia of the worst possible case scenario happening. I have no idea where it comes from. If my mom didn't answer the phone or wasn't where she was supposed to be, it meant she had died in a car accident. All those fears came to my head right there in that moment. I thought she was going to kill herself. And it was my fault. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. I remember her hanging up on me and all my paranoid feelings creeping in. I could see her lifeless body. Every minute felt like an hour. There are no words to describe the way I felt. I wanted to claw my skin off. I wanted to beat my head into the pavement. I hated everything about myself. I kept waiting for her to call me back or arrive home. I think that most people can struggle with despair. When you're in a situation or a circumstance that feels insurmountable and you can't see clear to the light, it can feel hopeless. And something I learned in walking this road is that sometimes you just have to find the tiniest bit of light, wherever you can find it, even if it's simply the appreciation that I have a water bottle, right? That I can just find something where I can put my point of focus on something that brings positivity into me and helps me to see forward to some possible next step. For me, I began to play with that, to hold for the light, to keep my eyes focused on the light, and when I needed it most, to just find my way to something that would bring me light. And that has become an important tool for me in navigating, even now, some of the low moments. There's a lot going on in our world. And it's unsettling. It's not just the uncertainty, of COVID, do this, don't do that. Oh, we're open, now we should be closed. Cases are spiking. Go be with people, don't be with people. It's creating so much stress for everybody. And there's such a heaviness. And then we have, this explosion that's happened as a result of something horrific, and an explosion that is just and justified. And it's still leaving us feeling very emotional. And that's not easy. And so to be able to find a place where you can look to something that brings light to you, it's really key right now. It's so important. I'm going to take a sip. Now I'm going to read to you from chapter 19. There are points in the book that I include in my journal entries. And I did that because I really wanted anybody who's reading it to have a sense of the moment I was in through the words I would write at that time. So here, this is June. It's 2014, so I'm a few years out of what, in Navy SEALs, they call it Hell Week, right? I think it was Hell Year. So it was a few years ahead, right? Out of Hell Year. 6/15/2014. Understand, every moment is given. Every breath, every smell, everything of beauty your eyes gaze upon. Every touch, glance, embrace, moment of passion. It is all given. It is precious. Life's moments are jewels, and the living of it is the treasure. And this is a really pivotal point in my life because I began to see, okay, I feel more solid. I feel more loving with myself. I needed to overcome some emptiness that I was feeling, and I was finally feeling like I was getting there. I spent the summer of 2014 in California with my auntie. Andrew was living with his girlfriend and had communicated to me that they had to move and that they both had recognized that they had that something had to change. During this period of time, I said to him more than once, I need you to hear me. I love you and I want to do life with you. But if you continue down this road, you're going without me. I kept having to say that, and he vividly remembers it. As a matter of fact, he told me recently that I said it a lot. It didn't feel like a lot to me, but apparently it did to him. At this point, I was no longer saying it for him. I was saying it for myself. In a way, it relieved me of the guilt of going on with my life in pursuit of what brought me joy, regardless of his choices. And that was not easy. 6/28/2014. Here's the key. When you step up, don't step back down. For the next few months, I didn't have a great amount of contact with Andrew. I had to create separation between us. I still saw him and still talked with him, but I was creating more space, realizing he had to choose sobriety and knowing that if he didn't, I might have to walk away. There's a deep sadness you have to contend with when you accept this truth. Telling him was my way of getting okay with that possibility and preparing him for it as well. One day, on my walk by the ocean, I had an encounter with focus. As my bare feet touched the cool morning sand and my eyes looked ahead at well over 1,000 birds in one area over the ocean, I knew there must be a large school of sardines to bring such a hungry crowd. Pelicans, seagulls, and pigeons were all competing for breakfast. I had never witnessed such a sight in person. With each step closer, I became more and more fascinated. So much so that when I was within about 15 feet, I slowly moved toward the water and waded out far enough to be encircled by the enormous flock. I knew that none of them would drop on my head, and I paused and took it all in. Any other time, if you were to walk up to a group of birds on the shore, getting within 15 feet of them, they would immediately flee in unison. But not that day. It didn't matter the species of fowl. They were focused. There was food for the taking, and I was a mere distraction. There was no fear of me and no need to fly away. I was of no consequence because the target was all they could see. It's like this for the addict, in a way. When in withdrawal, all they can think about is how to stop the pain of the physical dependency, to stop the dope sickness, the body's physical demand for the drug. That is all they can focus on until they can make that pain go away. And then the cycle of using, trying to get sober, and using again goes around and around and around. Andrew and his girlfriend tried to get sober together at home. Andrew was so far into his addiction that his body could not handle the detox, and his girlfriend was very worried about him. I suggested that she call Andrew's father because he was actually in town. They were in Arizona and I was in California. Shortly afterward, Andrew was taken by ambulance to the hospital. I wasn't able to talk with him at first. They couldn't regulate his heart. His father texted me, I'm watching them take vitals on skin and bones. I was at my parents' house. Without a car, which I unequivocally believe was God's way of saying, this is going to go down and she needs to not have a car. If I'd had a car, I would have been in the car immediately, but I didn't, and I paid attention. The reason I didn't have a car was that I planned to go to visit my parents by taking the train from San Diego. San Diego is where I was staying. As it turned out, the universe had something else in the works. Knowing he was in the hospital and being without a car to drive off in, I knew I needed to stop and think. I had a tough decision to make. I thought, Deborah, if you don't have your car, be aware of what's happening right now. Pay attention. You cannot allow your emotions to freak out. You've got to be fully aware of what's happening in this moment. As frantic as my heart felt, my mind stayed focused. That was the first time this kind of thinking had such an urgency to it. I kept thinking, if I go, what message am I sending? What will I get in the way of in terms of allowing his father to show up for him? After all, that's the one thing this boy of mine needed the most. True healing with his father. Making that choice meant me not being there. Listening observantly is not just about hearing words. It's also about listening to the details of the moment that you're in. I focused on what was really happening in that moment, what opportunity there was for a best possible outcome, and whether or not I was strong enough to make the right choice. There was a real possibility that Andrew wouldn't survive. Once they got his heart regulated, he could communicate with me, but his body had started to shut down, and I had to weigh that fact into my decision. Honor lies in the most impossible moments. Honor lies in making the harder choice. Honor at that time was in prioritizing the relationship between father and son. Honor was having reverence for the possibility that if I did this hard thing and communicated love while I was doing it, there might be recovery, and there might not. But what if I don't go, I worried, and the worst possible thing happens. He dies. Can I live with that? I was up the entire night, praying, crying, vomiting. I questioned the existence of God, and at the same time felt such anger at what seemed to be a lack of response to my prayers over the years. I went back and forth again, plagued by hopelessness, despair, and a deep fear of making the wrong choice. What I went through that night can only be described as my own dark night of the soul. And in the light of day, my decision was clear. I was resolved. I told my parents that I had made a decision and I had made peace with it. Before I told them, I clarified that I wanted them to be careful how they responded. I told them that they had to make peace with their response, whether they supported my approach or not, and regardless of the outcome. I felt responsible to present it in a way that they could feel clean about their response. We were in alignment. And with that, I picked up the phone. Andrew, do you know that I love you? I asked. In a very thin voice, he replied, yes, Mom, I do. And I said, I know that you love me. I'm not coming. And that was the hardest decision that I've made. It was hard kicking him out. It was hard saying no. It was hard holding the line. It was hard prioritizing myself in the difficult moments, but to not go, I can't describe to you. And as it turns out, it was right. If you refuse to work through, I'm on chapter 20, by the way, and this is a journal entry, October 18th, so just a few months later. If you refuse to work through the experiences you have, if you choose to ignore them, shove them away, you cheat yourself out of the growth that experience is intended to give you. I did that earlier in my life. I'm resolved and unwilling to do that now. In thinking about where we have been this year, all the ups and downs, I had this thought. What I gave him in silent demonstration was this: I will stand by strong in love, in prayer, but I will no longer support the choices that will destroy your life. And I not only meant it, I demonstrated it by my actions. Part of that was moving forward in the owning of my own happiness and my own life. Andrew's relationship with his father from that point forward began to heal. And it took time, and it was wobbly, I mean, as all healing and all relationships, it's, rarely is it some smooth path from that point forward, right? But he showed up, and Andrew needed him to show up. And that was an incredibly important piece of the puzzle. Andrew didn't, you would think that that would be enough. But that wasn't enough. He relapsed again. But eventually, in April of 2015, he went to California and began his life in sobriety. And now I want to read to you something that's a little bit more lighthearted, because all of that is a bit heavy, yeah? And actually, can I share screen at a certain point? Can you give me permission to share screen in a few minutes? Just give me thumbs up, yeah. Chapter 26. When you're ascending, the moment you get past the turbulence, when the plane starts to even out and you think, oh, hell yes, that's the moment we do everything for, right? The moment we feel like we got there, whatever that goal is. The first anniversary of Andrew's sobriety was April 16th, 2016. I was several months into my contract with Teague, which is a client of mine I still have to this day. And I love it very much. And it was going beautifully. There were obvious signs of success for both of us. And even still, I was smart enough by that point to fully comprehend that you always hold belief and keep going. We hadn't fully arrived, but we were on the path. We were on the runway, and we were catching speed while feeling our ability and having enough hope to continue to put one foot in front of the other. We went to a meeting, and Andrew shared his story, and watching him make people laugh and be 100% Andrew was amazing. To hear him speak meaningfully and deeply was so impactful. He dropped F-bombs and it didn't matter. He felt fully accepted, and witnessing this was one of the most moving and memorable moments of my life. We were in the air. We safely reached a comfortable cruising altitude around the time of his 2-year anniversary. He bought a handsome suit and wanted to surprise me with the absolute fact that he had become a man. In that moment, I felt like, okay, I have a whole new level of confidence that we can stay here. The pride, honor, and gratitude I felt were overwhelming. I also remember thinking, oh, we are flying now. There was certainly turbulence between the year 1 and year 2 anniversaries. For Andrew, it manifested in his struggle to find his way on a career path. If something happened with a job, as in he quit or got fired, it rocked my world because I had a cargo hold's worth of evidence from his prior job losses that could easily squash my belief. I knew at that moment that I had to find a way to ignore that past evidence. I also knew that he was in fear, and I knew he had to work his way to solid ground on his own. It was also a perfect opportunity for me to continue to practice powerful belief, not just for me, but also for him. I have come to understand that our children need to see a solid confidence and belief in them from us. And when I say solid, I mean that you have to fully believe it. Andrew, like most of us, both had and has magnificent bullshit radar. And now I want to read to you his thoughts about this evening. I wanted to show the change. I'd never had a suit, and I wanted one. It represented something as simple as, I can buy a suit now. I wanted my mom to see me in a suit. It was more that I wanted to wear the suit for dinner with my mom than I did for the meeting. I wanted to take her to a nice dinner. I told her to dress up and pick out her dress so that we could match. I knew it would touch her heart, and I wanted to have that suit that was mine for events like funerals. Sadly, he's been to a lot of them. I started shopping, found a tailor, started asking questions and piecing it together over time because I couldn't afford it all at once, and I wanted it to be nice. I got the shirt and the bow ties first. Then I picked out a gray suit and I went to Saks off Fifth Avenue and found a Michael Kors suit that was originally $2,600 for $600. Later, I got a belt and shoes to match. I spent a little from each paycheck and to put it to all together. It took about 2 months to get it all together. I want to show you the picture of that. That's my son. And this is us matching. And that was the night that we went to dinner and then that we went to a meeting. And I think that you can see, I see the joy on my face and I see the pride on his face. And this is my favorite picture of us. One of the things that my coach told me when I was working with her through the end 2012, 2013 year, and I really needed a coach, one of the things she told me was, what evidence do you have? She would have me look for the evidence to support what I needed. But I was very practiced at looking at the evidence for what I didn't want. And putting that into practice where I paid attention to, okay, yes, I did it once, I can do it again. He did it once, he can do it again. I've accomplished this, I can accomplish that. That has been a really important tool for me in just continuing progression, my eyes focused on progress. And it's been a big thing for him too. I'm going to stop reading there. If that's okay.